So I'll never forget the experience of becoming a father for the very first time. We had a long time of waiting between the beginning of Brittany's labor with Rylan and his actual arrival. Well, about 24 hours or so. Sitting there in the hospital, I was watching football. It was a Sunday morning. Sitting there just waiting. That's a long time to wait with everything just the same as it had always been. And then all of a sudden, you hit this moment, and about 45 minutes later, nothing is the same as it has ever been. I remember the first night in the hospital room. I was sleeping on the couch. They had Rylan in the room in that little hospital bassinet thing with us because they wanted us to get used to him being with us overnight. Brittany was in the bed, obviously, asleep, and they were teaching me everything I needed to do. The nurses were teaching me, this is how you change his diaper and how you clean him and how you do all things. She needs to sleep. You're on duty tonight. And I said, yes, I got it. No worries. Worries. I remember the first time in the middle of the night when he woke up, and I went over to the thing and I was like, I didn't want to touch him. And it had nothing to do with him. It was because I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to do something wrong. He was so little and so new, and I just was terrified of what was going on and what might happen if I didn't do something right. I was so scared. And it's in those moments that you begin to think, what have I done? What have I done? I wanted to be a dad. I badly wanted to have my own kids and to have a family. And now this little baby is here and 100% dependent on me and my ability to take care of him and to provide for him and to raise him. And right there in that hospital room, I had this little existential crisis. It was so terrifying. How do we get to that place? How do we get to that place? This thing that we had hoped for, had prayed for, had wanted actually happens, and we're almost taken off guard by it. Suddenly we get the thing we always wanted, and we're scared. And now we're scared. Zechariah, who we heard about a moment ago, that Darren read about a moment ago, he's a priest in the temple of the Lord. He and his wife, who is a descendant of Aaron, are faithful servants of Yahweh. The text just before what Darren read will say that they are righteous in the eyes of the Lord and obedient to God. But there's more. But they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. So, there are two things that we can draw from this description of Zechariah and Elizabeth. As faithful, obedient followers of Yahweh and the priestly role for the people, they would have been fervently praying for their entire lives for the Lord to deliver His people from captivity. They would have been praying for and seeking the Lord's promised Messiah to come and set His people free from the occupation and return Israel to its proper status as the free people of God. Secondly, they would have been fervently praying for a child, for an heir to carry on their family name and line, to continue the work in the priestly role that their family has held for so long. And up to this point in time that we read about this morning, those two prayers had not been answered. Neither one of them had been answered until this angel appears to Zechariah in the temple. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife, Elizabeth, will bear you a son, and you are to call him John." Don't be afraid. Your prayer has been heard. What an interesting introduction. Don't be afraid. Your prayer has been heard. Which prayer Which prayer was heard? The prayer for God to vindicate himself and his people in the eyes of the world? Or the prayer to give us a child and someone to carry on our family line and calling? Yes. Both. And the angel goes on to tell them about their son. And he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. To make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Zechariah's incredible response to this news, to this wonderful announcement, is in the passage that follows what Darren read for us a moment ago. We stopped the reading there. But right after that, Zechariah responds by saying, "How can I be sure of this? How can I be sure of this? I am an old man, and my wife is well along in years. I'm going to need some other assurances from you. I just don't see how this could be." His response is less than faithful. And because of that response, he's struck mute until the birth of the child. Now here's the thing. I used to think this was a lack of trust on Zechariah's part. This was a lack of faith on Zechariah's part. But as I have aged, as I have gained new experience, I actually have come to the conclusion I do not think this is a lack of faith or a lack of trust. Because here's the thing. I know what it's like in my life to receive the news of a pregnancy and have your first thought or reaction be uncertainty, questions, even fear. You see, between Rylan and Laurel, we had a few miscarriages. And then after Laurel, we had more miscarriages. I know what it's like to get that news and to think, how can I be sure of this? How can I be sure of this? So I'm not as hard on Zechariah at this point in my life as I was earlier in my life. I get it. I get what it's like to pray for something and then to have that prayer answered and be terrified. We begin our Advent journey today, and it's important for us to remember what this journey is actually all about. It's important for us to acknowledge the prayers that we are praying and the reality of what we are praying for, and to ask ourselves, am I really ready for this prayer to be answered? Am I really ready for this prayer to be answered? Advent is not just the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. It's not just a time to get ready for the birth of Christ in the manger and all the Christmas celebrations that come with that. Advent is a season to prepare ourselves and to look for the return of Jesus Christ, the second coming of Christ. It's a season to remember that this world is still broken and to pray for and to look for Christ's return and His ultimate redemption to come in this world. Christian worship scholar Lawrence Stuckey writes this: Advent concerns the future of the risen one, who will judge wickedness and prevail over every evil. Advent is the celebration of the promise that Christ will bring an end to all that is contrary to the ways of God. The resurrection of Jesus is the first sign of this destruction of the powers of death, the inauguration and anticipation of what is yet to come in fullness. Advent is about the return of Jesus Christ. We remember the original coming of Christ at Bethlehem, and we pray for and we anticipate His return. So here's my question. Here's my question for you as we come into the season, as we come to this time of Advent. I want you to consider, do you mean what you're praying? Do you mean what you're singing? And do you mean what you're praying? This morning we have already sung, O come, Emmanuel, a few times. We're singing and we're praying. We've sung and we've prayed, Come, thou long expected Jesus. And I'm just wondering this morning, do you mean it? Do you mean it? Are you ready for it? If the angel Gabriel appeared right here in our sanctuary, just like he did with Zechariah, and he said this morning, do not be afraid, your prayer has been heard, how would you respond? How would you respond? My oldest and closest friends are the two guys that are in my band meeting with me that we have every Monday. We go back 30 years to college. They're both pastors as well. We were talking recently, and one of them was talking about lamenting, really, a time when he had been praying for something to happen. He'd been praying a lot for this thing. And then he showed up to church for this particular outreach that he'd been praying for, and then what he'd been praying for happened. And people came, and they started asking questions about Jesus. And exactly what he was praying for was beginning to happen, and he was frustrated because he hadn't actually been ready. He wasn't ready. And he was frustrated with himself, and he said, I had been praying for rain, and I left my umbrella at home. And I loved that metaphor, right? Because we get that. Here in South Texas, we know what it is to pray for rain. But my question is, when you pray for rain, friends, are you bringing your umbrella? Is your faith in God such that you know when you pray for rain, I better have my umbrella with me? Zechariah had spent his life praying for rain, and he left his umbrella at home. So when the angel showed up and said, God has heard your prayer, it's been answered, he wasn't ready. He was scared. Now, don't get me wrong, as I already said, I understand why he was scared, but he was still scared. We're praying, O come, O King of nations, bind in one the hearts of all mankind, bid all our sad divisions cease, and be yourself our King of peace. So are you ready for Jesus to come and do that? Is your heart where it needs to be for Jesus to come back and do that very thing? The lectionary passage for today, the lectionary is that schedule of scriptures that takes us through the entire Christian year. And there's 3 cycles. Today we begin year B of the lectionary cycle. The lectionary passage for this, year B, the first Sunday of Advent, the first Sunday of a new lectionary year, is Mark 13, 24 to 37, which begins, but in those days, following that distress, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and he will send his angels and gather his elect from the 4 winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. And then it goes from there to say that no one knows the day and no one knows the hour of the Lord's return. So be ready. Be on watch. It's Adventy, isn't it? That's the lectionary message on the first Sunday of Advent. Basically, you all are about to enter a season of praying for rain. You better have your umbrella with you. Friends, this is why we wanted to mark the beginning of Advent this year just a little bit different than we usually do. Our world is a mess. War, divisions, famine, drought, sickness, uncertainty. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And these were the same realities of the world when Zechariah and Elizabeth were praying their 2 prayers. For Yahweh God to vindicate himself and restore Israel, and for God to grant them a child. God heard and answered their prayers. And Zechariah realized that he actually wasn't ready for this thing that he'd been praying for his entire life. That the things that he had always wanted, that he'd always hoped for, that he always prayed for were actually going to happen, and he wasn't ready. on this, the first Sunday of Advent, I just want us all to make sure that as we go through this season of looking forward to the return of Christ and His ultimate victory, that we're actually ready for that return and that victory. That our hearts are where they need to be, so that when we look and see Him coming down on the clouds, we're ready. We're going to spend the next few weeks praying for rain. So I hope you have your umbrella. Amen.